Hey guys, welcome to this perception revision video on the factors that affect perception. I'm going to run through the factors that you need to know as well as the two main perception studies that they can ask you about in the GCSE exam. Okay, so the first thing you need to know about is the effect of culture on perception. So culture refers to essentially the upbringing that you've had, the experiences that you've had, and how this influences how you make sense of the world around you and make perceptions. So your upbringing is going to be very different from somebody from a different country and a different culture. What this results in us having are cultural expectations of things around us. So the easiest example that we covered in class is the idea of our expectation and our understanding of an elephant. So when asked to draw an elephant, we are typically influenced by our cultural expectations and our cultural upbringing and experiences, which in our part of the world is very much like cartoons. You know, our experiences of elephants come from picture books and cartoons on the telly. We very rarely interact with real elephants. So we tend to draw and perceive an elephant in a very cartoony way. However, when African children are asked to perceive an elephant, they are influenced by their cultural experiences and their upbringing, and they typically tend to draw a very realistic picture of an elephant because they perceive them and they interact with them much more frequently than we do, because Africa is the elephant's natural habitat. So this matches up with Gregory's constructive theory of perception, as he suggests that your knowledge and experiences influence our perception, and this would match up with this idea of culture affecting perception here. The second thing that can affect your perception is your emotion. Basically, being in a good mood or a bad mood will massively affect how you perceive something. So if you're in a good mood, you're going to perceive things in a positive way. If you're in a bad mood, you're going to perceive things in a negative way. And that is essentially your emotion influencing you making a perception. So easiest example, you're in a bad mood, you've had a bad day at school, you get home, you get to your room and you hear your parents shout your name. What's your perception? Your perception is probably going to be that you're going to get told off for something, but you've got no idea why they've shouted you. However, reverse that. If you've just had a really good day and you've just got home and your parents have shouted you downstairs, you're probably wondering what they're going to tell me. Is it something nice? Have they heard some nice news today? It's just going to completely affect the perception that you're making. Then we have perceptual set and expectation. So I put these on the same page because they're very similar here. So perceptual set is the state of being ready to perceive certain objects or perceive certain things rather than other things. So let's say that you're out on a night out and the DJ's been playing loads of dance music. You are fully ready for the DJ to play the next tune, but if they suddenly change it to a piece of rock music, that would catch you right off guard, and you weren't ready for that. You were not basically ready to perceive that next song. So that would throw you off. Expectation, in a very similar way, is the idea of what you think you're going to perceive, what you think is going to happen. So, in a similar way, if I showed you lots of pictures of old ladies, if you can remember the old lady and the young lady illusion, you're more likely to picture and see the old lady in the illusion because you're expecting more pictures of old ladies. That kind of matches up with this study, the Bruner and Minturn study, into sort of expectation and perceptual set. And this is the study that uses the B13. So I always call this the B13 study. But in the exam, they will not say B13 study. They will say the Bruner and Minturn study into perceptual set. So you need to know that that's the B13 study. Right, basically what they did is they took 24 students and they essentially told them that they were going to do an experiment on recognising numbers and letters. And what they did is they flashed up lots of letters onto a screen, or they flashed up lots of numbers onto a screen, basically asking the students just to write down what they saw as fast as they could. And eventually, after lots of letters or lots of numbers, the psychologists put up the B13 illusion that you can see in the top right there. And that was the key stimulus, because that could be a B and it could be a 13, depending on what you're expecting and what you're ready to perceive. And as expected, those participants that were told lots of numbers were appearing on the screen and they'd been writing loads of numbers down, when the B13 appeared, they wrote down 13. They perceived a 13. Those participants that had been writing lots of letters down, when the B13 arrived, they wrote down B. Basically, conclusion, showing us that what we expect directly affects what we perceive. So it's a really nice study which shows that our expectations will impact the perceptions that we make. If we're expecting a number, we'll write 13. If we're expecting a letter, we'll write B. Now, in terms of evaluating this study, it's a basic lab study evaluation. So you go down the strengths of high control, replicability and reliability, but you go down the low ecological validity route because it's not very natural and the behaviour could have been unnatural and the participants could have figured out the study and they could be showing those demand characteristics. The final factor that you need to know about is motivation and how this can affect perception. And basically you need to know about this in terms of a study. So motivation refers to the drives and needs that cause a person to act in particular ways. And what we essentially mostly refer to here is our drives for food and water. And this is what Gilchrist and Nesberg investigated with their study. So they wanted to investigate how the motivation of hunger affected our perception. So I often refer to this one as the food study, but in the exam they will call it the motivation study. All right, a bit of a long method, but only so it makes sense. What they basically did is they took some participants, 26 participants, and they put them through a lab experiment into two conditions. One condition, they were told to not eat for 20 hours. No eating, starve yourself, basically a whole day. The other condition, condition 2, or B, they were allowed to eat normally. Just carry on as normal, don't do anything different. Then what we did is we brought them all back in after 20 hours and we showed each participant sort of nice colour images of some really nice tasty meals. And they had 15 seconds to look at those images. Those images then disappeared and reappeared, but the brightness had changed. So they'd got either like really dim or really bright. And on the monitor, the participants were told to adjust the brightness so that it was back to the correct original brightness. And they did this test after 6 hours and after 20 hours to see the impact of the hunger. So basically, those who ate normally, they pretty much got the brightness correct every time. They were quite accurate. But those who didn't eat and therefore were really hungry, they adjusted the picture every time to be brighter than the original image. So after 6 hours, it was brighter, but after 20 hours, it was even brighter again. But the main takeaway here is that those who ate normally got it correct. Those who were hungry made the image brighter. Now, this is probably because they were really hungry and the motivation of hunger was really pushing their perception so that the food, they were perceiving it as really delicious and tasty and they really, really wanted it. Whereas those who had eaten, they weren't too fussed about the how tasty the food looked. So basically, in short, this showed us that hunger, the motivation of hunger, does affect the way that we perceive things. So the more hungry you are, the more tasty you perceive something to be. Again, in terms of evaluating this study, keep it fairly simple as a lab experiment. Take it down to replicability, reliability, take it down in terms of sort of unnatural environments. We don't typically behave like this, so we don't know that people are acting naturally. It's a nice, easy evaluation. You could go down an ethical route of talking about starving somebody for 20 hours, but they would have consented in the first place, so they knew what they were getting involved with. Right, guys, that's your summary of your factors and your 2 key studies for the perception section of the exam. That's everything now that you need to know for the perception section. Watch the videos as many times as you need to. Get ready for that perception section in the exam.